what we thought we'd do today is start by just giving you an overview of what the commission is, what the commission has been charged with doing. And we've had two major reports that we've issued so far. The first one on synthetic biology, which I'll talk a little bit about. The second one on a historical investigation that we were asked to do on research that was conducted in the late 1940s on Guatemalan prisoners and the intentional infection of those Guatemalan prisoners for research purposes. The third report, which we're working on right now, and we can give you some of our thoughts on, although we can't give you much more than our current thoughts on because we haven't yet reached consensus points with the Commission more generally about what it will say. We have a meeting next week in Boston where we will be trying to finalize what our report is on the protection of human research subjects in federally funded clinical trials, which is kind of part two of the question of the research that we did on the Guatemalan prisoner studies. So I'm going to start by talking about the first project that we worked on, give you a little bit of background on the commission, tell you about the synthetic biology report that we worked on, and then when Steve gets here, which will be any minute, he will talk you through Ethically Impossible, which is the second report that we issued. We'll tell you a little bit about the project that we're working on right now, the human research subjects, and what some of the projects are that we're taking on starting in January, and how all that will work. You're not expected to be able to read this, but this is the executive order for the creation of the commission. So as Hank Greeley explained, each president by executive order has created a bioethics commission. And they've had different names. There's been the President's Council on Bioethics. I think that's a pretty cool name. I wish we had that one, but it's not our name. There's the National Bioethics Advisory Commission. There's the Human Commission on Radiation and Experiments. I mean, I can't even go through all of them. We have an right, kind of neat. We're Pixby. But what's interesting about this executive order and what's interesting about the creation of this commission is each one has looked a little bit different. This commission has on it 13 people. The president of Penn is the chair of the commission. The president of Emory is the vice chair of the commission. And these other folks who are on the commission, I'll tell you just a little bit about. Yolanda Ali is Muhammad Ali's wife. She is they created a foundation to address Parkinson's, and she's also on the foundation for Michael J. Fox. And she has worked on patient advocacy and is kind of the community voice and community member. John Aris is a traditional bioethicist at UVA, and he brings a long history of traditional bioethics. That's me. Then Christine Grady, along with Alex Garza and Nelson Michael, are part of what makes this commission unique. So rather than just drawing from people from the general public, these are three different people who work in the federal government. The idea being that past commissions haven't necessarily been really in touch with the true interworkings of the government. And they haven't had a liaison to the government to be able to work with the different agencies to whom many of the different recommendations are directed. And so this commission was designed where at least 3 members of the commission would be members of the federal government. And Christine Grady has been at NIH for a very long time working on issues of bioethics. Alex Garza is our man in black. He's at the Department of Homeland Security. He's an assistant secretary at Homeland Security and is able to give us some of the kind of really interesting background about what happens with some of the more classified information and classified projects when we have classified briefings. He also just keeps us all in check, which is nice. And Nelson Michael heads up HIV research for the Army and has been doing tremendous work on HIV research for a number of years, also a physician. Raju is a geneticist at Harvard, and that's going to be quite useful for us as we get into genes to genomes, which is our next major project. Dan Solmacy is a Franciscan friar and also a physician, and he brings a perspective of, the kind of religious perspective as well as some of the moral voice issues, and he's done a lot of work on end of life and consciousness. Anita Allen is the other lawyer on the commission. She's also a PhD in philosophy. She's at Penn and has worked a lot on issues of privacy, which is important for some of the issues that we look at. Barbara Atkinson is at University of Kansas. She's the vice chancellor and a physician. And then Steve, who you'll get to see here shortly, is a neurologist at UCSF, and they've just started this kind of enormous neuroscience center there, which is great because one of the topics we're also taking up is neuroethics after we deal with genes to genome. So we're both quite excited about that topic, and it's going to be really valuable to have his perspective as well. Valerie Bonham is the executive director. She is an attorney and has spent a long time working in the government on different issues of bioethics, and she heads up a staff of about 24 people that we have. Some other things that are interesting about the commission that are different are we're charged with being a practical commission. So past commissions, particularly the last one, was very theoretical, and they issued very voluminous reports on philosophical background on different topics, but their recommendations tended to be a bit diluted in how deep the philosophical background was on the reports that they issued. Whereas we were asked to give very specific and precise recommendations, and to think about the recommendations and to whom those recommendations would be directed, what the feasibility of those recommendations were, and also potentially to set up some follow-up on those recommendations, which, as you'll see with synthetic biology, is one of the things that we did. So we're really trying to focus on practical recommendations and to have reports that are very accessible and not kind of huge, long tomes that people don't read, even though those can be incredibly useful in shaping the conversation in a field that goes forward. It may not be as useful to the president and to the executive branch, which is whom we are supposed to be advising. Feel free to ask any questions along the way, especially because it'll delay, my part of the talk before Steve actually gets here. All right, so that's kind of the background on the commission. Well, one last thing, which is some people ask me, how did these people get selected? I don't really know, to be perfectly honest. So we all got calls from the Office of Presidential Personnel, and they said, hey, have you ever heard of the Bioethics Commission? And would you be interested in being appointed? And then we went through a 4 to 5 month long vetting process where they asked us every question that you could possibly think of and read everything we've ever said. And for me, since I'm the youngest member of the commission, that was a little bit easier. For other people, it took a little bit longer, which is why the process took 4 or 5 months. I'm pretty sure I was not the long person that they actually had to go through this with. But so that's how we got appointed, which is I have absolutely no idea.
What month were you called?
January. So
either before the inauguration or just after? Or is this 2010?
This is 2010. So the chair and the vice chair were announced in November. Then they started calling other people, starting in the beginning of January. And then one person fell out of that. And so when they announced the commission, we had 12 people announced, even though it calls for 13 people. A month later, John Aris was announced as the 13th member of the commission. And so we don't know who that person was who fell out of that, but apparently that was a bit of a hang-up. And past commissions have been extraordinarily controversial, and lots of people have opined about the creation of this commission. What does it mean that you have 2 university presidents who may not have a tremendous amount of time to be spending on a bioethics commission since they're university presidents? What does it mean for who was selected, for what kinds of topics people are interested in? So people spend a good bit of time talking about those types of things, and I'm happy to give you my thoughts on it, but they're just as much guess as anybody else's. Yes?
So were security clearances required?
They were not required, although I did go through security clearance because when we did synthetic biology, we thought it was important. Well, so Alex Garza, our man in black, the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, felt like it was quite important that we have our subcommittee read in on a classified briefing. So I went through security clearance, and Stephen and I reviewed the classified material with respect to synthetic biology. And then none of that actually ultimately ended up being in the report, and we didn't think it was important to be in the report. But, other members of the commission have the opportunity to go through security clearance if they would like to be read into classified briefings when they arise, but we haven't had occasion for other classified briefings yet. Any other questions?
What sort of scale of studies are you talking about, and how many countries? Are you talking about thousands or tens of thousands of studies that your commission might thereby influence in the Obama administration framework, which could end a year and 5 years from now?
Right.
Or are you talking?
Our first issue, which is synthetic biology, took 6 months. Our second and third report we're issuing right now. So we issued our second report about a month ago. We're issuing our third report soon. We will issue our fourth report by June. And
are you influencing the kinds of studies being done How many studies might that be?
So if by studies you mean the reports, or do you mean report?
Like, no, the Guatemalan study, and so
Ah,
that
got
your
it.
kind of commission might thereby prevent such problems in the future. And surprisingly, that it did, that the previous commission's studies did not.
Right, right.
Publications didn't.
Well, so the way that the charge for the executive order works is it gives us authority to be able to select the reports and also allows us to commission empirical studies if we would like to as well. We have commissioned a number of empirical studies, for example, to try to understand really the scope of human research subjects, trials that are happening in the country, because there is no centralized database that exists right now. We're trying to create that kind of database. Synthetic biology, we didn't select. What happened was on the day that this article came out, which is the article by Craig Venter's group announcing the creation of a bacterial cell controlled by chemically synthesized genome, which I'll explain what that means for those who don't know. The day before this, we had an emergency call of the commission. So before this went to print and before it hit the media. And Craig Venter, who is a master in many ways of controlling media, but also just has some really terrific research that he does, had actually notified many different parts of the government that this report was about to come out, that this article was about to come out. And because of the potential public response to this, we were asked to have this be our first topic of study. And the Guatemalan study as well, we were asked to undertake as well. And so our first 3 studies have all been requests by the president rather than reports that we have selected ourselves to commission or topics that we have selected ourselves to commission. We expect to start in January on genes to genomes, but if something happens in the interim where the president asks us to take on something else, then we will take on something else. And as to whether or not we could have prevented, for example, what happened in Guatemala, the idea of the project that we're working on right now is to try to advise the government on both the revisions to the common rule that are happening, which we'll talk about, but also whether or not the protections of human research subjects in clinical trials that happen domestically and internationally are adequate to guard against the types of things that have happened in Guatemala and in other studies, and to assure the president that the same type of thing couldn't happen again. And so we are devising a set of recommendations to try to guard against that happening again. There was another question. Somebody else had their hand up. Parker.
I was just going to ask, do you have a sense of whether the president himself is the one making the decision about what topics he wants the commission to look at, or whether there's sort of significant political pressure from various quarters?
So the Office of Science and Technology Policy was instrumental in selecting the commission. And my understanding is that Zeke Emanuel and Rick Weiss were the 2 people who were at the Office of Science and Technology Policy who really were primarily involved in advising the president about who should be on the slate of people who should be recommended. And the Office of Science and Technology Policy, their job is to advise the president about these types of issues and issues that may arise. My sense of what happens is that the Office of Science and Technology Policy says, we think that this is an important issue, and in consultation with the president, it then ends up as a particular issue rather than necessarily coming in the reverse direction, which is the president telling OSTP to direct the commission to do something. But I mean, that's a guess, and my guess is, given the role of OSTP, that that's how these things actually happen. Yes?
Is there some attempt to make this have Republicans and Democrats?
Yeah, so we weren't asked anything at all about our political leanings, preferences, ideology, or anything like that in being selected for the commission. Nevertheless, there is some diversity of ideology here on the commission, and I'm quite certain that that was taken into account in selecting the members of the commission, is to try to have a balance. Because for past commissions, when it has been universally one party or the other, it suffered significant criticism. So this is a left-leaning group, as you would expect for a commission that is advising a Democratic president. Nevertheless, there is a diversity of ideology, and a diversity of ideology that's represented in each of the different deliberations that we have as well. Other questions?